Vaishnayo, Vaishnayo, Namo. So we're feel extremely blessed to be here in this very special place. The ambience you hear in that recording we just played of Prabhupada chanting, there's something very special about it. And you can listen to lectures of Srila Prabhupada recorded here, and it has that same kind of ambience. This is this unique feel. And there's one very wonderful lecture Srila Prabhupada's giving, and he's talking about how all the different energies, earth, air, fire, water, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, are all Krishna's energies and are non-different from him. And Prabhupada was emphasizing the point that these energies of Krishna are non-different than Krishna. And Prabhupada said to everyone sitting here, at that time, he said, and I want you to think about this. He said, you are not sitting on the floor. He said, you are sitting on Krishna. Just think about that for a moment. He's sitting on Krishna, on Krishna's energy. So tonight we'd like to talk about some of our experiences with Srila Prabhupada in person, some of our experiences with his Vani, his words, and how he's inspired us in many different ways. And we're not going to be necessarily in a chronological order, but I'd like to start in 1977. Started in 1977. Started in 1977. Not going to be necessarily in a chronological order. I'd like to start in 1977. Started in 1977.
It's reminding me of Russia. It's just that they repeated in Russian. It's just English twice.
Okay, we'll try that again. So, 1977, we were blessed to go to Vrindavan to see Srila Prabhupada for his final pastimes, and I might talk more about that later. But it was a very intense experience, and unfortunately they didn't let the ladies go in Srila Prabhupada's room until Prabhupada's last day. But I had the fortune of being able to be in Prabhupada's room anywhere from 4 to 14 hours a day for a week and a half. And so it's very, most intense experience. I could come back to that later. And after Srila Prabhupada's departure, we were in India for about a month, and every single class, morning and evening, was just devotees talking about their experiences with Srila Prabhupada, things we never heard before. This is so amazing and so focused on Srila Prabhupada. And then we came back to Canada, and the first, I think we had a late flight back. The next morning I get up and go over to the temple, and there was, in the prasadam room, there was a Jewish man sitting there all alone, sitting on his prayer mat with his, I can't remember the name of the hat, I can see him very vividly in my mind. His name was Reuben. So I naturally thought, I'm just going to tell this man about Srila Prabhupada. And I sat down and began to try to say something about Srila Prabhupada, and he said, oh, I met Srila Prabhupada. So I just said, wow, really? Tell me all about it. So he started telling me how he worked on the subway in New York, and on many occasions he would take his lunch in the park. I imagine that was Union Station.
Could be in any park. We don't really know. He just said in the park.
Probably the Union Square, and I know sometimes he went to Tompkins Square Park also. And he told me he used to see Srila Prabhupada there. And he was referring to him as Swamiji at first, because that's how he knew him. And he said he would see the Swami, and he said when the Swami was speaking, he told me, he said, I swear that the birds would land in the trees and be listening to the Swami. And he said sometimes the park, there would usually be like papers blowing around. He said it would become very, very still. And he said there was just something special about him. And he told me that on many occasions on his breaks, he would sit in these parks on the bench, and Prabhupada would sit and talk with him.
So some days he would see Prabhupada with the Harinam party, and other times Prabhupada would just be on a walk, and he would meet him when he got out for lunch. So this is one of the days when he just met him at lunchtime.
Yeah. So that happened on many occasions. And so this gentleman, Reuben, he began to tell me how Srila Prabhupada would preach to you. Actually, I'll just wind it back a little further. He told me that he became very attracted to the devotees and Prabhupada, and there was only a few devotees in this little space. And he said he thought about becoming a devotee in the temple. But somehow he decided to go on a world tour, and he told that to Srila Prabhupada, that he was going to go on a world tour. And he told me that Prabhupada just pointed out into the park with his finger and said, one day you will come back to Krishna. So this gentleman, Reuben, he went on his world tour. I don't know the last year he met Prabhupada, 66, 67, and he was explaining how in one corner of the spiritual realm there's this ocean, the causal ocean, and there's Karnadaksha Vishnu, who from his body emanates innumerable universe, and in each universe there's Garbhodaksha Vishnu, who lies down, and Brahma comes from his navel, and then Shirshadaksha Vishnu enters into. And he's telling me this, and he actually started crying. And he said,
We have to do the effects also.
it was a real profound experience for me meeting this man at that time. And he said, I cannot believe I can remember this after all these years. And he told me he had the utmost respect for Prabhupada and was so attracted. And he said one day, he said, Srila Prabhupada, for him it was the Swami at that time, he pointed out into the park and said, I have temples and printing presses and disciples all over the world. And Reuben told me that he did not know what to think, because he knew this was it, this space, and just a few devotees. And Prabhupada's saying he's got type temples all over the world. So he just kind of paused for a minute looking at Prabhupada. And then he said, Prabhupada put his finger out, pointed into the park and said, they are simply separated from us by time. We simply have to move through time and have faith in Krishna. So 10 years, boom, he didn't know anything. Shows up in Vancouver, here's a Hare Krishna temple. And at that time, the Yadabar Prabhu had just produced a video called, what was it called? The World of
Hare Krishna.
World of Hare Krishna, but the temples all over. And Reuben was just like, but that was such a profound thing, that how Prabhupada had said that what we have now in ISKCON, hundreds of temples all over the world, hundreds of thousands of devotees, between here in 1966, 67, 65, 66, 67, to 2025, that was all in Prabhupada's vision. I mean, that's very hard to get your understanding. Sometimes people, they call them visionaries, they have some creative ideas. Prabhupada had a vision of something that actually existed. So, just as I was saying, we're not sitting on the floor, Prabhupada said we were sitting in Krishna. We're actually sitting here in Prabhupada's vision. And that was extremely powerful, probably one of the most amazing experiences I had, very indirect, powerful experiences of Prabhupada's potency.
So Satsvarup Maharaj was visiting shortly afterwards, because he used to come to Vancouver on retreats to write the Leelamrita. So we told him about this man, and they interviewed him, and they researched a little bit to see if it's true, and we may not have the details of which park exactly right, because we don't remember. But so that's why you read that in the Leelamrita.
So to wind the clock back, 1970, we met in high school, got married. We knew that we didn't want mundane life. I remember Uttama saying she didn't want to end up with
fuzzy slippers and curlers in my hair, and the neighbors coming over for coffee.
So we just had an old English car, we packed everything and went to the west coast of Canada looking for something different. Had no idea what it was. Met vegetarians on the way, became vegetarian. Ended up in the city of Victoria, and it was like a hippie health food store. who had friends who had occult bookstores, started reading some books. And actually before we read any other kind of occult books, somehow, probably because of my bad karma, my mother-in-law sent me a Bhagavad Gita, but it was by an impersonalist.
Bhagavad Gita as it wasn't.
Yeah. And I started reading it, and he said, God was something so far off, don't think about it. And so we were exploring all these different philosophies and yoga groups, and it just became extremely frustrating because no one actually explained what the absolute truth was. And at one point, I remember we did I Ching, we had this I Ching book, and I did the I Ching thing, and it said, you will meet people from the East who will help you with your quest. And sure enough, we met some devotees in Vancouver.
Victoria.
And Victoria. And before we met the devotees, one day I went to the Victoria Library, and I went to the metaphysical book section and just reached down, without really looking, grabbed two books, bottom right shelf. It was Krishna Book Volume 2 and Bhagavad Gita as it is. And I started reading Krishna Book, and it just got into the Shamataka Jewel, if you're familiar with that pastime. And I was thinking, well, this is just like a soap opera. So I gave that to her, and she loved it. And I started reading Bhagavad Gita. And reading Bhagavad Gita, all of a sudden Prabhupada saying, Krishna is the absolute supreme personality of God. That's what I've been trying to find out. Prabhupada just, boom, presented it. And everything he said was so crystal clear. It was just like a light went on. And at the same time, Srila Prabhupada describes that if you come in contact with impersonal philosophy, your intelligence can be ruined. And that actually happened to me. Because I began reading Prabhupada's books, and I was so attracted by the way he explained Krishna and the philosophy, this concept of bhakti, but he kind of speak against impersonalism, and I would think, I can't read this anymore. But I'd be drawn to pull it out. And then one day, actually before I came to this sloka, I happened to meet a devotee on the street. And I was really praying to meet, so I knew I had to meet someone to answer my questions that I had. And there were some devotees on the street. I ran after them, caught up with them. I tried to ask them some questions. I don't know if you ever knew Kundi Kaksha. And I ran up to them and tried to ask them some questions, and they said, oh, sorry, we can't talk to you, we're just going to the park to have our prasadam, our lunch. They wouldn't talk to me. And they sent me down the street to find another brahmachari. They said, keep going, you'll find someone. So there's this brahmachari, orange robe. I go up, I try to ask him some questions, and he couldn't really answer my question. Brand new bhakta. And he said, here's a book, it'll answer all your questions. And I remember I opened my wallet, I gave him everything, absolutely everything was in my wallet. I don't know why, I just gave it to him. Then I tried to ask him another question, and he told me, he said, well, my Sankirtan leader said I shouldn't speak to anyone for more than 2 minutes. And he was just turning to walk away, and it was kind of a profound experience. Like, have you ever been really, really close to a thunderbolt? Lightning hits, it just sounds dead silent after. So I'm there in the street corner, and it's just like all of a sudden everything became still. And he's just turning to walk away, and I guess Thormy were kind of seeing as like orange robes kind of moving with the wind, and the orange sika was blowing when he had red hair. And it was just like this prophetic voice I heard that said, this is the representative of a very great man. Powerful. And then right after that, I went back, opened up the Bhagavad Gita, and I came to the verse where Krishna says, Vita Raga Maya Kroda Man Maya Mama, that you have to become free from attachment, fear, and anger to be able to develop Krishna consciousness and love for Krishna. And Prabhupada explains there in that verse that the fear you have to overcome is the fear of a personal spiritual existence, because we've been conditioned since time immemorial to a material existence which is filled with misery, it's temporary, and filled with ignorance. And he said, even if you hear about eternal spiritual reality, you have no reference point, so you won't be able to understand it until you meet a pure devotee who can explain that. I realized that was my fear, and I was just able to drop all my hesitations, and I don't know, we moved in the temple probably like a couple weeks later.
And then we came to visit, we were living in Victoria, you probably, well, if you're American, you probably don't know Canadian geography. But we came to visit the temple in Vancouver, and we stayed overnight. We started chanting Hare Krishna. And, you know, it's interesting when you look back on things pieced together. I can remember being in high school, so that would be, well, yeah, 69, I guess, because I met you in 70. And the musical Hair that was played on Broadway here, the soundtrack with the Hare Krishna mantra hit #1 in the hit parade. And so it would play every night when I'm going to sleep, and this Hare Krishna mantra is going through my mind. You know? I don't remember the tune. So, but anyway, after we came to the temple, we had a van, and we said, oh, why don't you stay overnight? We went to Sunday Feast. And it's interesting because the temple president stood up, and they had Jagannath deities and a Panchatattva picture. And the president said, I don't usually say this, but I thought today I would introduce the deities. So this is, you know, Lord Jagannath, he's God, and this is his brother Balaram, and this is his sister Subhadra. I just thought, wow, okay. You know, I was an atheist before. Somehow or other, you know, Prabhupada's potency is just there. And so they said, well, why don't you stay overnight and you know, you can come to Mangal Artik. So someone knocks on the window, you know, about 3:30 if you like, you can take a shower and you can come to Mangal Artik. So they gave us beads. And we didn't have anything to do, like they all had services and this and that. So somehow or other we sat down and we were chanting, you know, on the beads. It just took a long time because, you know, I was trying to fit it into the Hare Krishna tune that I heard on the radio. It took a long time. They said, no. You chant, you know, Hare Krishna, not into the tune on the beats. So anyway, very shortly after we moved in, and that was probably in September. And we had Prabhupada's books, so by the time we came to the temple, we'd read all of Krishna book. We were quite avid readers, and we could, you know, get the philosophy. And so Srila Prabhupada was coming to visit Los Angeles, which is straight down the coast, west coast. And so Bhadak said, well, we should all go. They leave 2 people to look after the deities, and the rest of you take all the seats out of the van, and no seatbelt laws at that time. And you just drive down to Los Angeles.
So one morning, I don't know how many, but 15, 18 devotees pile on this one van. And the van's just backing up, and one of the devotees who was staying back opened the window and shouted out, just got a phone call, Prabhupada's not coming to Los Angeles. And everyone just dragged themselves out of the van. And the next morning we got a phone call, Prabhupada's in Los Angeles. And everyone jumped back in the van and boom, we put it down there.
So this is just the beginning of December. So maybe we've been around about 2-3 months, I guess. And you know how, probably many people say this, but Prabhupada had such an influence. Like when before we would open the curtains, we would have this kind of ritual where for the deity greeting in the morning, someone would say, Prabhupada's coming, and then we somehow open the front door. We had this kind of ritual, right? And he would
Felt
come
that
in.
Prabhupada was there. It was so powerful.
Yeah.
So powerful.
So then we saw Srila Prabhupada for the first time in the temple room, and we're quite tall, so you know, you just have such a massive, Prabhupada has such a massive impression, and then you see a man of small stature, it's a little bit, okay, you're surprised because his presence is just so great.
It was like you walked in the temple, and then we were surprised, but then you just felt this wave of Prabhupada's presence, and everyone just offered their obeisances.
So a couple of days, I think there had been an initiation the day before, and then the next day we were getting initiated. About, I don't know, 10 people from our temple and some from a few other temples. And in the morning, the Bhagavatam class was about the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. And Srila Prabhupada was talking about how all the members of the Yadu dynasty, they met at on the shore of the ocean at Prabhas, and they ended up drinking wine made of, the text said, purified rice. And Prabhupada goes, purified? No, it's putrefied. Change that. The person's reading the verse, right?
But then he actually described
how to make the rice wine. So he says you can take rice and you can ferment it, and it makes a very nice wine. I'm going, okay. I'm thinking I'm supposed to vow to, no intoxication. And Prabhupada saying you can make a very nice wine. So then we got initiated, and most of us I was 20, my husband was 21, were you? I don't know where.
we're pretty close.
And there was one old man, he was probably 35. And the temple president didn't know whether to initiate him or not, because he had been recommended, because he'd been having a little bit of a hard time giving up smoking. So, but he was doing pretty good, and so Bauda talked to Prabhupada and said, he's doing pretty good with it, and I think he can do it, because he's been coming for a long time, and he likes the philosophy. So when this man went up to get in his beads, he was an older gentleman, Prabhupada kind of touched his hand a little bit and gave him the beads, and then he's giving his vows, no meat eating, no illicit sex life, no gambling, and then he says, and no intoxication. And Prabhupada says, and that means no smoking. So a couple of days later, there was going to be a big wedding, and I'd never seen a Vedic wedding. And it was one devotee who was very dear to Srila Prabhupada, and he'd sent him to preach around Japan. And he had been a sannyasi, and somehow or other, he met some very influential people in Japan. And he met I don't know if she was, but she was some kind of heir to the Toyota car company. So she was very favorable, and she was favorable also to this devotee. So somehow or other, he asked Srila Prabhupada, can I switch ashrams? I don't know all the details behind all of that. And so Prabhupada gave his blessings. In fact, he even married them. It was them that was getting married. Now the reason I bring this up is it's also connected to New York City. So during the initiation, it was initiation and a wedding. First, Prabhupada had to initiate her, because in those days, Prabhupada wouldn't do a fire yajna unless we were initiated. First, we had to become initiated to see if we were sincere, that we could actually follow, marriage vows. And because he said we don't want to offend the fire by getting divorced later, so he wanted to make sure we were solid. So he was giving her initiation first, and so Srila Prabhupada only initiated her. Nobody else was in initiation. And he asked her, so what are the 4 regular principles? And she just didn't really answer this. So sort of I think maybe it seemed like she didn't understand the question, like English wasn't her first language. I don't know how much English she spoke. And so Prabhupada looked at her to-be husband, and he said, does she know the principles? And he said, yes. And he said, what are they? You say them. Now, this is just my 2 and 2 together. It's very interesting how Prabhupada put the responsibility on him. You're bringing her, you take the responsibility. So, I don't know how much later, but he was one of the big leaders in New York City. And he lived in the building, and she had been used to many servants. And I remember one of my close friends, she was asked to be her servant. She needed a personal servant, which was unusual, but he's the GBC and the temple president, and they can serve the wife. But somehow or other, she it was fairly new to Krishna consciousness. It was really hard for her to give up eggs. But she knew she should only eat what's offered to Krishna. So she was requesting that her omelets get offered on Radha Govinda's plates. And this was happening, and the devotees were freaking out. And, it's hard to approach authorities, and maybe somebody spoke. I don't know exactly what happens, as we're on the other side of the continent. It's interesting, though, when you're in the movement, when Prabhupada's here, you kind of hear day by day what's going on. There'll be some letters, some tape, something. So even though you don't have personal association with Prabhupada, you hear very quickly what's going on. So after a while, many devotees were leaving because they just thought, this isn't right, I can't live in this situation. Many devotees left. And then finally somebody writes a letter to Prabhupada. And so they wrote a letter to Prabhupada, and the letter came back. Why are you even asking? You know it's wrong. Don't you read my books? So why do you even have to ask this? Of course it's wrong. And then he said, I really appreciate the devotees that stayed and tried to make the changes and are working through it. And it's kind of interesting how some things stick out in your mind. And then it wasn't until years later I'm putting together, Prabhupada's kind of picking up, and he puts the responsibility on him. She didn't vow to not eat, no fish and eggs. She probably has a bit of a culture, So anyway, I just see Prabhupada's expertise, It's just, hoping that somehow or other Krishna consciousness is going to be spread. And, they did spread Krishna consciousness throughout, that part of Asia. Did a good job, even though one person has a little difficulty. So it was very interesting to me just about staying and reading Prabhupada's books. And so I'm not saying that in every situation you have to stay, but it's like you gotta stick with it. Because we've been around a long time, and we stay in one temple for a long time. It's great, then it goes down, then it goes up, then it goes down. It's always gonna be like that. You just stick it out and it's gonna get better. You wanna say something?
So you can wind the clock a little forward, and we're back in Vancouver, and Radha Krishna deities were installed in Vancouver. It was 74 or 75?
74.
74, they installed beautiful Radha Krishna deities. Now, Prabhupada wasn't there for the installation. They were installed, and then they were whisked away to some rural farm
And
project.
Prabhupada gave permission for them to get moved,
Yeah.
to be installed in one place, and when we got the farm project going, to be moved. He gave that permission.
So the altar was there, Radha Krishna, Jagannath and Gaunitai, nice worship, lots of devotees. The first winter came, and somehow the Canadian immigration people came in, found that all these Americans were there, and deported them all. So all of a sudden, boy, there was almost no devotees, the money just dried up. And the fourth canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam had just come out, and there's a pastime there of Dhruva Maharaj, in which it's described by Srila Prabhupada how you can worship the deity according to time and circumstance with what is available. So the temple president thought, oh, this is great, time and circumstance, we're here, there's not much money. He said, we'll stop getting opulent flowers for the deities, we'll only have flowers for arti, no more garlands, no more vase flowers. He said, well, we don't have any money, we're not going to buy any more opulent boga for the deity. So this is in a remote place in Canada. We had what you call an outside, it's called a root cellar, which is a kind of a cool storage that dates back for hundreds of years, that system. And in it were cabbage, apples, potatoes, and carrots. So that became the menu for the deity for all the offerings. 6
offerings a day with that, and lots of milk though.
And he said, well, there's not many Brahmins here, he said, and he said that our initiation request for second initiation was in the mail, so he said, well, it's as good as being done. So he had us start to do some deity worship. So we were doing some deity seva.
Mostly cooking.
Yeah, and while this was going on, Prabhupada was in India, and it would take quite a while to get a letter to India and to Prabhupada to come back. So he wanted to send a picture of the deities to Srila Prabhupada so he could see the deities and give them a name. So that day, he had someone get some flowers, and he had, did you make the vases?
I don't remember who made the
He had
vases.
someone
We
make the
had two
vases.
nice vases made.
Explain that.
So then, I don't think it was me, because I don't think I was going on the altar that much, we were just cooking. He had the two vases put on Radhakrishna's altar, took a picture. Then he told the pujari, move him over to Jagannath's altar, took a picture. Same vases, moved him over to Gaurani's altar, took a picture. So he sends the picture off to Prabhupada and requests a name for the deities.
And so all this kind of reduction in the deity standard is going on for, must have been over a month. Then Prabhupada's reply came back. Actually, 2 letters came within,
3 days.
I think 3 days. The first was the letter where Prabhupada gives the deities their name, and also him granting us second initiation.
That was in the next letter.
That was in the second letter. And so the letter is very wonderful. I don't know if you ever had the book called Darshan with all the deity photographs. And if you look up the Vancouver Temple, you can see that letter there. It's a very wonderful letter. Srila Prabhupada starts off by saying that the photographs of your newly installed deities, he just didn't say very beautiful, he said they are very, very beautiful. And he said you can name them Sri Sri Radha Madana Mohan. And he said you should worship these deities very nicely, like the deities are worshipped in Los Angeles, in New Vrindavan. See that they have nice bathing ceremony, 6 artiks a day. And keep in mind, this is like 1974, and there's no very difficult to phone India. Letters take like months. If you were really wealthy, you could have like a fax machine, like they were extremely expensive then. So Prabhupada had no idea what was going on. And so in the letter he's saying nice bathing ceremony, a nice artik, and then he says, and you should always make sure they have nice flowers, nice foodstuffs, and they're only served by duly initiated Brahmins. All 3 things. And you can see that Prabhupada,
He has this intimate connection with the
yes,
deities
exactly,
everywhere.
yeah. Prabhupada had an intimate connection with Sri Sri Radha Madana Mohan. And then in the letter, Srila Prabhupada, he said, Sri Sri Radha Madana Mohan have very kindly descended before you in this form. And if you serve them very nicely in this way, he said, you will, so he wrote this to the whole community. He said, you will all develop love of God. And I remember we were sitting together reading that letter, and I told her, I had this feeling I'm going to be I told her, I have this feeling I'm going to become head pujari.
2 weeks later?
Yeah.
One lesson on how to do the deities, one lesson on how to do that, see you later.
Yeah, I became head deity. And also in that, our initiation letter came, as a very interesting letter also. In the letter he said, in this community, and he gave the name Nugokula for the community, he said, there will be many difficulties.
Oh.
And he quoted the verse, Matashta Shasta Kundiya Shitoshna Dukata Agama Payano Nitashta Bharta. How there's a non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and you must tolerate that without being disturbed. That letter was so prophetic.
It was I forgot where I was going. It was interesting because we had some cows there that we had smuggled across the border from New Vrindavan because they had too many cows and the farm was right on the border, so we didn't go through the immigration. We just, someone walked them across the fields. That's what we did in those days. We were poor. You just get some cows from New Vrindavan. But I guess they carried a blue tongue disease. So there was an epidemic in the area at one time amongst the sheep. The sheep get blue tongue and it kills them all. And so all the sheep, they were going around. Cows carry the disease, but the sheep die from it. It doesn't hurt the cows. So they came around and they tested all of our cows, and one of the cows that we'd gotten from New Vrindavan, it had this blue tongue disease. So they took the cow and they slaughtered it. And so we wrote to Prabhupada and said, and they gave us a check for $1,000. They wrote to Srila Prabhupada and said, what should we do? He said, rip up the check. We cannot take their money for this. And he says, if you cannot protect cows, there is no use. You can move the deities back to Vancouver if you like.
That was a happy day.
So we should have it, we're done almost.
Oh, there's a bit more we can, what time are you gonna buy?
Go to 7:30. So?
It is now
7:25.
7:25.
You can go a little past that if you want.
So that letter from Srila Prabhupada, that's something I took through thick and thin. I remained head pujari for 20 years in Vancouver, and I always made sure flowers, nice offerings of food, and only Brahmins on the altar.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
The administration always wants you to cut down the artiques. Does it have to be a Brahmin cooking? Because it's hard.
Yeah. And then later in 1977, when, maybe I'll just kind of end with my experiences with Srila Prabhupada in 1977. It's hard to go too far because it's hard to remember.
Do we want to
But
know?
a little bit maybe, because on the way to India, I was reading the Bhagavatam, and I happened to come across the verse where I was reading how Nasta Preshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloki Bhakti Bhagavati Naistiki. How by regularly reading the Bhagavatam and rendering service to the pure devotee, all these inauspicious things within the heart are destroyed, and loving service unto the glorious Lord comes into being established as an irrevocable fact. So I was reading that, and Prabhupada in the Purport talks about there's Bhagavan, there's the book Bhagavat, and the person Bhagavat, and Prabhupada said they're actually identical. Identical. So it's amazing how Prabhupada's the book Bhagavat. So we got to Vrindavan, and first opportunity I had, I went into Srila Prabhupada's room, offered my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada, and I looked up at Srila Prabhupada, and it's very hard to explain. I don't know if I heard it with my mind or with my heart, but I could understand that Srila Prabhupada was the embodiment of his books, and he was embodied in his books. And so many times in our lives that things just come up in Prabhupada's books that are so relevant. And so I used to get all kinds of time just in Prabhupada's room. I began to notice that there was hardly anyone there, so I started spending more and more time in Srila Prabhupada's room.
Sri Prabhupada was in his bed at that
Yeah.
time.
And it's quite ill. And I was there one afternoon, and Prabhupada was being treated by a Ramanuja Kaviraj, which Prabhupada had actually seen in a dream, and he sent the devotees looking for this doctor, and they finally found him. And he had also had a dream about Prabhupada, about treating Prabhupada. So he came and he was looking after Prabhupada. And I was in Prabhupada's room one afternoon, and this Kaviraj, or doctor, he came in, and he would come in regularly and feel Prabhupada's pulse and put a stethoscope on Prabhupada's heart. So he just came in, put a stethoscope on, leaned over Prabhupada, and put the stethoscope on Prabhupada's heart, and he actually jumped back. And he said at that moment, Srila Prabhupada was exhibiting the heartbeat of a normal, healthy person, which was completely impossible for someone in his condition. And he said to the devotees that he realized at that point that Srila Prabhupada was a completely, fully liberated soul, and whether he stayed in this world or left, it was just his pastime. And one other thing happened that very much impacted me, because it was one afternoon, two devotees came in, and they started to chant Brahma Samhita. They had a harmonium, and they were chanting beautifully, Brahma Samhita, and I'm thinking, I'm in Vrindavan, it's Kartik, in Prabhupada's room with Prabhupada, I'm hearing Brahma Samhita. I thought, can't get any better than this. And then Prabhupada said, I just want japa. And I was shocked. The two devotees that were chanting Brahma Samhita, they walked out of the room. I was shocked. So I thought, if Prabhupada wants japa, I'm going to chant japa for Prabhupada. So Prabhupada left several days after that, but After that point, I was in Prabhupada's room I used to bathe Lalita and Vishaka on the altar. As soon as I finished bathing them, I would go to Prabhupada's room and chant japa, take a lunch break, dinner break, be in Prabhupada's room until I was falling asleep, standing up chanting japa. And at night, I would just be able to sit like between me and you. I was that close to Prabhupada. I was just sitting on the floor chanting japa for Prabhupada, for up to 14 hours a day.
Bad place to tell these stories.
So sometimes people ask me, what is it like to be with Prabhupada? And all I can say is if you chant the holy name with attention and with the intent,
To please Prabhupada.
you will feel exactly what it's like to be with Prabhupada, because that's what I experienced at this day. That's the only way I can control my mind. If I just I'm chanting these rounds for Srila Prabhupada. So, yeah.
Now that we've totally wet your carpet, does anyone have any comments?
Yeah, time for one question or so, 1 or 2 questions.
Maybe I could say one thing about Prabhupada's vision. Between what happened here and what there is today, Prabhupada was this great person incredibly empowered person who inspired so many individuals to do many, many small things, little bigger things, medium-sized things, maybe some big things, but all that together amounted to what we see today. And we are all, sitting in this vision here, Srila Prabhupada, we can also contribute in some way to that. Some small little part we can play in facilitating Prabhupada's vision of Krishna consciousness expanding. And just imagine if we all do that, what it'll be like in another 50 or 100 years. So, we're all actually blessed to be somehow engulfed in Srila Prabhupada's vision. That's the greatest fortune. Thank you all very much. Krishna.
Thank you both so much. It's,
Do you want it?
no, it's okay. My wife and I love these devotees. I have the pleasure and privilege of knowing them for a little while now. And they're just such gems, and they're in certain places they're fairly well known. They're not what you would call famous devotees. But it just goes to show you Prabhupada's influence,
Yeah.
You don't have to be this big famous person with a lot of followers to be so committed and devoted, and to make such an impact for so many people. They've impacted so many people's lives, and just the fact that you both would focus on premarital counseling and young married couples and older married couples. It's just such an unheralded area that you've tapped into, and by doing so, you create solid devotees for Prabhupada's mission.
That's something we've done as a service to Prabhupada. And it was also very hard for me, that we lived in this community called Saranagati, to move to Saranagati, because I had that instruction from Prabhupada.
Or you take it personally anyway.
Yeah, and that was very difficult, but by some mystic arrangement, Krishna sent a shalagram through which I could worship Madan Mohan.
So we took him with us, so we moved to
Yeah,
Saranagati.
so we have to actually, Madan Mohan is actually with us always. And a part of what we do is also related to the worship of Madan Mohan, because Madan Mohan is the deity who brings the Abhideya, the connection. Sambandha is the deity who brings the connection with Krishna. And connection with Krishna means also connection with Krishna's devotees, which also means connection with our spouses and our families and those around us. But sometimes those connections are hardest to keep healthy and strong. So that's our service to Prabhupada, is to help with this. Help devotees to connect with Krishna, to Madan Mohan.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the talk. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you being here. As you know, they live in Canada, so I encourage you take advantage of them being here tonight, and if you do think of questions or comments or just want to talk to them, I encourage you to do so. You'll feel enriched for sure. Would either one of you like to lead kirtan?
No,
We are,
Krishna gave us many talents, but that wasn't one of them.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Somebody go for it? Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll have a brief 5-minute or so kirtan, followed by prasadam.
are you gonna put this mic over there for her?
That's a great idea. I never thought of that. As long as it's going back there.
Paramahams, the Parajikacharya, Asta Terasata Sri Srimati Devangri, A.C. Bhakti Vedanta, Swami Maharaj, the Prabhupada Vijay, Jayo Vishnupada Paramahams, the Parajikacharya, Asta Terasata Sri Srimati Bhakti Vedanta.